Right, so tonight is the night as the King's Speech is set to be voted on to be ratified. It was a measly offering by the Tories, but all the talk is in relation to the amendments to that King's Speech that have been set out in relation to the UK's position on calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, as Israel continue to rain fire down on civilians, hoping they'll hit the odd Hamas operative as they do, but oops, oh dear, never mind, being their attitude if they don't. All in the name of self-defence, of course, whilst they're doing it. There are, at time of writing, 3 amendments being set out, whilst 2, that of the SNP and Labour lefty Zarah Sultana, call for a ceasefire. Starmer's Labour has tabled one that absolutely does not, flat refusing to back the SNP amendment because that would undermine Labour's position in Scotland, apparently. So, weaponizing the Scottish vote, because for some reason Starmer thinks that if they back a ceasefire, it'll be encouraging votes for the SNP, whilst also assuming calling for more killing is somehow appealing to the average Scot, I presume, which I'm sure it isn't. They can't use that excuse not to back Zarah Sultana's amendment, though, in many ways copying the SNP's one, but being put forward by a Labour MP, of course. Other Labour MPs could put their name to that and not suffer the pathetic accusation from Starmer's lot that they are undermining their own party by supporting another. Party before the greater good, very much Starmer's position, and his own amendment bears that out, pathetic as it is. He is resolutely on the side of Israel, as the Tory government is. The amendments, sadly, I feel, are doomed to fail. But knowing who voted in what way here and now, who stands by the people of Gaza on a vote when it matters, is invaluable information for all voters. Because anyone voting for the killing to continue is not somebody any of us should be voting for, surely. And really that should transcend all political divides. Right, so today is the King's Speech ratification vote, normally just a formality to get government going again, laying out the plans for the next year, the last year leading up to a general election almost certainly. So the conduct of all MPs is something more and more of us should be scrutinising. Nothing will expose their mentalities more than whether or not to vote for a ceasefire, and the 3 amendments proposed for the King's Speech concerning our national position regarding a ceasefire in Gaza, though. And will spell out who is in favour of stopping ambulances getting blown up, babies in special care dying because the oxygen they need gets cut off, attacks on hospitals and churches and mosques and all manner of civilian infrastructure, on evacuation convoys, on refugee camps, and even in the south where Israel literally told northern Gazans to go. A vote against such blatant and egregious conduct should be a no-brainer, but unfortunately we have far too many politicians, notably our main party leaders, utterly in the thrall of Israel, completely on their side, and absolutely not on the side of the opinion of the majority of the British public, 3/4 of whom want a ceasefire. It is of no surprise the Tories are backing their unamended King's Speech. They're in government. They left talk of a ceasefire out, even though there are Tory MPs unhappy with that position. Perhaps unhappy enough to back a ceasefire amendment? Who knows? Certainly, some Tories signed Labour MP Richard Bergen's early day motion calling for one, but how they actually vote is what actually matters. We have a ceasefire amendment laid down by the SNP, which I covered in another video, along with Starmer's warning his MPs not to back that by weaponising their electoral chances in Scotland to put them off. As I've said already, though, I think this issue transcends party lines. I expect Labour MPs to still back that amendment and also back Zarah Sultana's very similar amendment, which gets around that Scotland issue that Starmer and co have dreamt up. Insult to the Scottish that has been. Now, Starmer has taken a very hardline stance on this issue, which, as we know, which is why this vote tonight almost puts him under more scrutiny than Sunak now. But that is also his own fault. He's been saying all week that his MPs were being whipped to vote against ceasefire amendments, and that any of his front bench team who vote for a ceasefire will be sacked for it. That's sick. But he also underestimated the dissent in his own ranks over that he may have no compunction in seeing the killing continue instead of working to see it stop, but a lot of other MPs didn't go into politics to be quite that depraved. As such, Starmer's blinked a little. He's put forward his own amendment, still not calling for a ceasefire, still putting all the emphasis on Joe Biden's US foreign policy of humanitarian pauses, at least until Biden changes and calls for a ceasefire, and then you know Starmer will immediately do the same as well. You do know it's Brits and not Americans that vote for you, right, Keith? Anyway, he's now whipping at Labour MPs not to vote against ceasefire motions, but to abstain instead. Now, Sir Abstain's a lot is back, folks. However, it remains his commitment to sack any shadow ministers and their juniors if they choose to vote for a ceasefire. Here's what his motion says. At the end, add, and submit to your majesty that this House wishes to see an end to the violence in Israel and Palestine, unequivocally condemns the horrific terrorist attack and murder of civilians by Hamas, calls for the immediate release of all hostages, and reaffirms Israel's right to defend its citizens from terrorism. Believes all human life is equal and that there has been too much suffering, including far too many deaths of innocent civilians and children over the past month in Gaza. Reaffirms the UK's commitment to the rules-based international order, international humanitarian law, and the jurisdiction of the ICC to address the conduct of all parties in Gaza and Hamas's attacks in Israel. Calls on Israel to protect hospitals and lift the siege conditions, allowing food, water, electricity, medicine and fuel into Gaza. Requests the government continue to work with the international community to prevent a wider escalation of the conflict in the region. Guarantee that people in Gaza who are forced to flee during this conflict can return to their homes and seek an end to the expansion of illegal settlements and settler violence in the West Bank. And whilst acknowledging the daily humanitarian pauses to allow in aid and the movement of civilians, believe they must be longer to deliver humanitarian assistance on a scale that begins to meet the desperate needs of the people of Gaza, which is a necessary step to an enduring cessation of fighting as soon as possible and a credible diplomatic and political process to deliver the lasting peace of a two-state solution. It is utterly pathetic for numerous reasons, and little wonder that in the run-up to this vote today, councillors are resigning once again over Starmer's stance. Notably again, one in Oxford, where Labour have already lost their majority there and are hanging on to power there as a minority outfit already. Having lost another councillor, they're another step closer to losing control entirely, and I can imagine after Starmer inevitably backs his own amendment for those humanitarian pauses again, just longer ones, more will go, as he'll have rubber-stamped his position with a vote that needs to haunt him forever. Let's shred this amendment, though, because it really is shit. Wishes to see an end to the violence, but won't actually vote for that. Condemns the attacks by Hamas, but not Israel. Calls for the release of the hostages, yes, let's not forget all the ones Israel's holding from the West Bank, though, which have nothing to do with Hamas. Believes all lives are equal and there's been too much suffering despite not criticising Israel and not voting to end the suffering. Reaffirms the UK commitment to international law when Israel has been an occupying force for decades in violation of international law, and under international law Palestine has a right to defend itself and oppose the occupation however it can. Obviously I don't condone the violence though. I'll come back to international law in my next video though, as Starmer and Co really do not know what they're talking about on this, and their ignorance has just been exposed on that, undermining this amendment too, because it's written out of sheer bloody ignorance. Let the people of Gaza return to their homes is a particularly twisted thing to say as well, so they can get bombed out again. How many even still have a home? Because if you think Israel haven't been targeting homes, you'll be appalled to hear that half of Gazan homes in the north of Gaza no longer exist. End settler expansion and violence in the West Bank. Yes, one bit I do agree with. But the amendment only does so on the predication that humanitarian pauses are allowed, which is just the most pathetic thing because we need a ceasefire. Let the aid in as long as we can bomb it after. That's the message. It's the equivalent of wetting a victim's lips before you resume the torture. I was minded to think of Christ on the cross when I read that analogy. It's a very good one, not one of mine. My level of thinking was that I thought of the Disney film Robin Hood at that point. That's the level I work at. My favourite animated classic as it happens, because a humanitarian pause was committed by the Honourable Sheriff of Nottingham when he stopped to let the little rabbit open his birthday present, if you remember, those of you who have seen it. And then the persecution resumed when he took away the coin, the rotter. But in all seriousness, this is what is going on a much more bloody scale. Not gifts at stake, but lives. As things stand, it's being reported that of the 17 frontbenchers who were thought to be preparing to vote for a ceasefire, who had signed Richard Bergen's original EDM, Starmer's amendment has, it seems at time of writing, reduced that to somewhere between 6 and 10, depending on your source. Nearly a dozen placated by the ability, at worst case, to sit on their hands instead of backing their previous actions when they signed that EDM. A great pity if their principles are so easily bought off. It won't be acceptable to people checking the voting record afterwards to see how their MP voted on this. Starmer, when running to be Labour leader, stood on a pledge to promote peace and human rights. Tonight, he's going to sack any frontbencher who votes to stop the killing. That's what his pro-Israel backers bought by getting him into the top job. Anyone who voted for him, believing him to be something else, has been conned. Those backers will be delighted. We need to wipe the smiles from their faces because this guy isn't fit to be an MP, let alone be next in line to be the Prime Minister, and neither is any other MP who votes against a ceasefire tonight. Do we really want to be represented by so many people who are set on seeing killing on this scale continue? Really, I mean, come on, ask yourselves. Zach Polanski of the Green Party made an excellent comment on this. He said, "In the Green Party, we have been calling for a ceasefire consistently. I was expecting Labour would join us eventually in doing the right thing. Grim to see them dig harder in the opposite direction towards supporting warmongers. Absolutely shameless." Yes, it is. Shameless. Thank goodness there are alternatives like the Greens that we can vote for if we do not accept this. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say in this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer chose to weaponize Scotland on this issue, as I alluded to in this video, and you can get all the details of that here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.